Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank you for joining us for the second session of Cherry Bekert's 2025 Not-for-Profit Virtual Conference. My name is Jeanette Schwartz. I am a partner here at Cherry Bekaert and the leader of the Not-for-Profit Outsourced Accounting Services practice here. This session offers 1.5 CPE credits. To receive CPE credit, you must attend the full 90 minutes and answer 6 polling questions. In this session, you will learn about the evolving grants compliant framework, establishing financial integrity and reporting accuracy, and how to adapt to compliance challenges in the ever-changing grant environment. I'm pleased to introduce our two speakers for this session, both senior associates in Cherry Bekert's advisory services practice, Paula Heller and Maria Barat-Riley.
Thank you, Jeanette. We appreciate you. If you'll go to the next slide, Maria. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paula Heller. I'm a Grants Management Lifecycle Solutions lead here at Cherry Bekaert, and we provide a wide variety of services from pre-award to post-award to closeout to any kind of support that you could need in that grant lifecycle. I have over 25 years of experience in the grant environment, predominantly in nonprofit and higher ed, also in local government. And I am a certified grant management specialist, so I'm excited to share my knowledge with you today, and I'll turn it over to Maria to introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Barat-Riley, and I am a senior associate with Cherry Bekaert. My background is much like probably many of yours. For the past 20 plus years, I've been administering federal grants at the state government level, from Department of Energy to transportation, gas pipeline, and railroad activities to various stimulus grants. I've seen a lot of it. And in my various roles, I can honestly say that I've experienced many of the little gotchas of grant compliance. So hopefully today we'll be able to give you an update and help prevent some of those from happening to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Jeanette, for clarifying. This is an hour and a half long session, and there'll be 3 polling questions. There won't be 3 that you have to answer. You need to answer all 6. So we want to start off with a disclaimer. We want to make sure that we are just expressing opinions. We're not providing you with legal advice. We're not providing you with financial advice. Seek out competent professional knowledge if you have specific circumstances that relate to your nonprofit. Otherwise, if you can go to the next slide, we also want to make sure that you copyright these materials, that you share them internally with your people that you work with. Maybe somebody isn't in attendance today that you think would really have benefited from it. You can do that in-house, but please don't post things on websites or anything without our written consent. Okay, perfect. So let's go over what we're going to talk about today. We have 3 big areas and then key takeaways and questions. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the groundwork for understanding compliance. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're speaking the same language, we understand the same landscape that we work on. The other piece is looking at the emergent trends. What's happening right now? What's been happening in the last year? We'll pretty much kind of dial back to the beginning of 2025 and kind of say, okay, these are the big things that are happening. Then we want to go beyond the basics. We know that you have your day-to-day functions and managing your grants portfolio, but we want to strengthen your grant compliance, augmenting technology and applying best practices. So we'll summarize it all and key takeaways of adapting to a shifting landscape. And then I kind of want to say, we have packed these slides with information, with words. Goes against everything they teach you about how to create a PowerPoint presentation. But we know on the backside, we want you to be able to download this slide deck and use it for your own purposes so you can further examine it. So at times it's going to seem like we're reading from the slide, and that's because we're going to be reading from the slide because we put the most critical information there. All right, so let's get on to our next slide. We're going to start with our first polling question. What sector do you represent? And this is good for us because we want to know generally how people are showing up today. We know that you're not for profit, but there also may be other players in the house that are visiting us just to gain that inside knowledge. So we'll leave it open for a few seconds. Let's see. And I want to know how many people are here. I don't know if we have that data, but that would be really fun. I know we had 700 people yesterday registered.
Paula, we have a question already about how to download the slide presentation.
They'll be available. You should get a link. Something should be sent to you if you're registered today. So great. So we do have some other people here. We have local government, state government, 2 people from the federal government, some foundations and consultants and other, which is interesting. I'd like to know what that is, but not for profit is our highest sector, 70% of you. So that makes sense because that is what the conference is about. All right, so let's go dive in.
Okay, so understanding compliance. What is compliance? Let's start with the foundation of what we mean by compliance in the grant world. Compliance isn't just about following rules. It's about protecting your organization and the people you serve. It ensures transparency, accountability, and ultimately continued eligibility for funding. These 8 areas represent the major compliance touch points that every nonprofit and subrecipient should be paying attention to this year. The first one, the uniform guidance. This is the foundation, the federal rule book that tells us what's allowable, how costs must be documented, and what thresholds apply. The 2024 revision of 2 CFR 200 is now fully in effect for awards issued on or after October 1st, 2024. So if you haven't reviewed your internal policies recently, this is a good time to do it. Be sure to double check the terms and conditions for any awards recently received to see which version of 2 CFR 200 apply to that grant. You could be running grants that have different terms at the very same time. The second area, administrative priorities. As we all know, there have been some major changes at the federal administration level in both agency and program priorities. Each federal agency sets its own administrative priorities. Think about focus areas like equity, sustainability, or workforce development. These can affect how programs are evaluated and funded, so your compliance plan needs to reflect those agency-level priorities. The indirect cost rates. Indirect cost rates are often misunderstood, but they're critical for sustainability. Whether you're using the new 15% de minimis rate or a negotiated rate, make sure your allocation base is consistent and documented. This is one of the first things auditors look for when reviewing financial compliance. The training requirements. Training is an underrated compliance requirement. Federal agencies expect that your staff administering grants will be familiar with uniform guidance, agency-specific policies, and program rules. Building annual refresher training or onboarding modules into your compliance plan can demonstrate due diligence during a review. Reporting and monitoring. This includes both financial and programmatic reporting. Equally important is monitoring of your subrecipients. Remember, when you pass funds through, you inherit the responsibility for how they're used. Civil rights compliance. This goes beyond EEO statements. It's about accessibility, language access, and ensuring programs do not discriminate on any prohibited basis. Agencies like DOJ and Health and Human Services have been stepping up enforcement and data tracking here, so it's an area to double check. Procurement rules. Procurement remains a top area of audit findings nationwide. Make sure every purchase follows competitive requirements and that your documentation supports how vendors were selected. The simplified acquisition threshold and micro-purchase limits were both updated, so confirm your policy matches the current federal levels. Data security. Finally, data security has become a compliance issue in its own right. Federal agencies are requiring stronger data protection, especially if you handle personally identifiable information or health data. This means encryption, access controls, and cybersecurity training should all be part of your compliance strategy. So when we talk about compliance in 2025, it's not just about the rules and regulations of uniform guidance. Each of these 8 areas touches your operation, your staff, and your technology. So where can you find all the requirements you need to follow to be successful with your compliance efforts? Oops, not there. Let's try this one. This one. So when in doubt, go to the source. Your first stop, your first and most authoritative document is always your grant agreement. That's where you'll find the specific terms and conditions that override general guidance. Next, you'll want to look for any state or local statutes that apply, especially for pass-through funding. And then, of course, the Uniform Guidance and Federal Compliance Supplement. These form the backbone for all federal grants. And finally, don't hesitate to ask your auditor, grant advisor, or program officer if something isn't clear. How you apply the rule is what gets tested in audits. I know from personal experience, having a contact that you can call when you need some guidance can be a real lifesaver. It isn't always doable, but if you can develop those relationships, it is definitely worth the effort. So now that we know what compliance means, why is it important? The importance of compliance. Why does all of this matter? Because non-compliance is expensive, both financially and reputationally. Improperly managed grants expose your organization to a high risk of potential question costs or even repayment. Public sector and nonprofit entities also face high expectations. We operate under a microscope with transparency and accountability being constant pressures. And finally, there's the issue of limited resources. Many nonprofits and agencies simply don't have enough staff or expertise dedicated to grant management. That's why building efficient systems and cross-training staff is crucial to staying compliant without burning people out. So we know what compliance is and why it's important. Let's look a little deeper into the compliance at the federal level. This slide gives us a quick overview of the uniform guidance, which is formally codified in 2 CFR Part 200. You'll hear that over and over again. The purpose for the update this last year was to streamline federal grant regulations. It brought multiple old circulars into one consistent document with an emphasis on improving performance and outcomes, reducing administrative burden, and promoting transparency and accountability. The uniform guidance applies not only to federal agencies, but also to all non-federal entities, so state, local, tribal governments, nonprofits, and higher ed institutions. The uniform guidance spans the entire grant lifecycle, from pre-award to post-award, closeout, and finally audit. And here's what the structure looks like when you open up the Code of Federal Regulations. Title II, Federal Financial Assistance. Chapter 2, Part 200 is our main focus. The uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards. Then you'll see it broken out into 6 subparts. Understanding this structure, being familiar with it, helps you quickly find what you'll need. For example, if you have a procurement question, you're probably looking at subpart D, while an indirect cost question would be under subpart E. And many times I found that we're flipping through many different sections trying to come together with the final answer of what we're looking for.
Yeah, uniform guidance has this amazing ability to loop you around a lot. So it's a rabbit hole sometimes.
Now let's talk about the 24 revisions. This update was the biggest change to the uniform guidance since it was first implemented a decade ago. These updates were published in April and became effective October 1st, applying to all new federal awards and funding increments issued after that date. Again, I'd encourage everybody to just double check what version any recent awards are operating under. There are 6 major themes highlighted here. Plain language and streamlined notice of funding opportunities. OMB pushed agencies to simplify notices of funding opportunities so applicants can more easily find eligibility and evaluation criteria. Terminology updates. Several definitions were modernized and clarified, including recipient, pass-through entity, and period of performance. Agencies now have greater flexibility to use fixed amount subawards up to $500,000, which reduces administrative burden for smaller entities. The expanded use of funds. Clarifications were added around pre-award cost, participant support, and cost-sharing flexibility. And with cybersecurity and procurement, new emphasis on safeguarding federal data and ensuring procurement systems account for cybersecurity risk. And final, whistleblower protections. They strengthen language to ensure staff who report misuse of funds are protected under federal law. These revisions aim to make grant administration more accessible, efficient, and accountable. But as mentioned earlier, it means it's time to update your internal policies, templates, and training materials. And again, I'd point out that policies of any potential subrecipients may also need to be updated to reflect these changes. Paula, do you want to add anything to this? Because this is kind of a lot. I did a quick run over of just what these categories are, but there's a lot of meat in the detail.
There is, later on in the presentation, we'll address some more specific. We'll dig deeper into cybersecurity. We'll look at internal controls and the requirement for documentation of monitoring now. So we'll get there. We are just doing what we said. We're laying that foundation, make sure we're all speaking the same language and on a level playing field.
Fantastic. Thank you. So now that we've covered structure and the revisions to the uniform guidance, let's bring it back to what it means for your organization. So understanding the grant agreement. Every compliance journey starts here. The grant agreement is your contract with the federal government. It spells out deliverables, timelines, reporting expectations, and special conditions. Review it carefully before you spend a dollar. If there's a conflict between the agreement and the uniform guidance, the agreement always wins out. Allowable activities and costs. Only activities and costs specifically tied to your approved scope of work are allowable. Under 2 CFR 200.403 to 0.405, costs must be necessary, reasonable, and allocable. This is where clear internal coding and documentation keep you out of trouble. And for the reporting and documentation, compliance lives and dies by documentation. Make sure financial and programmatic reports reconcile to your accounting system, and keep source documentation, invoices, timesheets, receipts. Scan it, keep it attached, paper copies, just keep it, because you will probably at some point in time have to go back and dig through it when you get questions. For subrecipient monitoring, you're responsible for ensuring the subrecipient follows the same federal rules you do. Conduct pre-award risk assessments, do policy reviews, monitoring plans, site visits, and review checklist. Doing all of that, it demonstrates grant compliance and that you are ensuring the funds are being spent appropriately. Budget changes and prior approvals. Remember, any significant change to your budget or scope usually needs written approval from your program officer. Monitoring oversight. Internal monitoring shouldn't wait until audit time. Build in quarterly reviews of expenditures, match requirements, and performance metrics. Oversight shows funders you're proactive, not reactive. For organizations spending $1 million or more in federal funds, the single audit requirement applies. This is a change from prior threshold levels. Plan ahead by reconciling your CFA, your schedule of expenditures federal award, verifying your indirect cost allocations, and documenting any cost transfers. A good rule of thumb once shared with me was closeout begins the moment the grant is awarded, not the month before the grant ends. For your subcontractor and vendor compliance, procurement remains one of the biggest areas for audit findings. We were talking earlier about making sure your internal policies are updated. That includes your purchasing policies and the policies of any subrecipients. Make sure vendors also understand they're subject to the same standards you are. And document your competitive processes and keep justification for any sole source contracts. And finally, the whistleblower protections. Compliance includes creating a culture of integrity. Federal law protects employees who report misuse of funds or unethical behavior. Your policy should clearly state those protections and provide confidential reporting options. The takeaway here is previously the feds would allow you to conduct an internal investigation for expected fraud, abuse, or just concerns. But now they want to be notified immediately, and then you can proceed with an internal investigation. They don't want to wait for the results before they hear about it. So when you look at all 9 areas together, this is the practical side of compliance. It's what you and your team are living every day. And with that, I think
And
Paula
it's a
is ready
lot.
to dive in. That was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it from the federal standpoint, you have that layer of compliance. Now you have to move into agency-specific compliance, which is its own, has unique spin-offs in their interpretation of things. So if you can go to the next slide. So each agency has its own title. We're always living in Title II. You can see the second one there, Federal Financial Assistance. But there's actually 50 different titles. Number 35 is reserved. But if you have education grants, then you're also needing to be in compliance with Title 34. If you have commerce grants, then you also need to be knowledgeable about Title 15. So think about your award portfolio and which one of these titles you should have a working knowledge of. At least have it bookmarked so that you can quickly access it when you need to look something up. Next. That's going to be my mantra, next.
Sorry.
That's all right.
It's not wanting to go next. It wants to stay here. There we go.
You must go. The other thing is we always talk about 2 CFR 200, that uniform guidance. And when we're doing that, we're talking about subtitle A. But there, in addition to that, there's subtitle B, where agencies have federal financial assistance guidance broken out by chapter. So for example, there's the Department of Justice is 28, chapter 28. Am I doing that right? Yeah. National Endowment for the Arts, 32. So there's specific guidance in other areas that you need to be paying attention to. So we have 2 CFR 200, Part A as our backbone for compliance. Then you have these 2 other areas where you need to look up award-specific conditions. And typically you're going to see these in the terms and conditions of your award. They're going to reference it. All right, next. So this is one of those slides where I'm going to read a little bit because I think it's important. We're going to look at 3 different agencies that hopefully at least one of the 3 you have funding from or you've had to experience. So the first one we're going to look at is FEMA. Whether you're on the East Coast and dealing with hurricanes or in the middle of the country with tornadoes and flooding or fires on the West Coast, wherever you face those issues, at some point your agency may have to come in contact with FEMA. So they've done some pretty significant updates. They updated their policy and procedure guide, and it basically clarifies eligibility, which is important. One of the things they are allowing is when they're providing sheltering, you can bring pets. So that's pretty interesting. They're also being more proactive and thinking about the integration of resilience and mitigation. They also have fully adopted 2 CFR 200, and they have clarified that these updates are on January 6, 2025. So when your disaster occurs, determines which version you should be working with. They also have updated the expectations for emergency versus permanent work. If you've ever had to work with FEMA, you know you have a window on the front end to create safety and security, and then you move into the next phase where you're working on permanent work. From a financial standpoint, there's clarification that you have to have costs incurred and paid before you can ask to be reimbursed from FEMA. And that's important. You have to spend the money to get reimbursed. The other piece that they've updated is that your insurance proceeds have to be treated as an expenditure reduction. So for example, if you have $500,000 in damages and 400,000 is paid out and covered by your insurance, then only the balance left over, that $100,000, is eligible for FEMA public assistance. So the guide here, if you need FEMA, is that you're going to need to map your projects to whichever version is correct. And then you may have to kind of refresh your internal checklists and processes in the way that you're handling any contractors or subrecipients that are assisting you with your FEMA process. So this is just one glance at how a federal agency makes changes, and then you have to be aware of them and move forward. So let's look at another agency that probably a lot of you have. So we have HHS, Health and Human Services, and they released a grant policy statement. One of the key pieces is that they fully adopted 2 CFR 200. So it's no longer using its own guidance in 45 CFR. And so basically you have to update your internal policies and training materials to reflect that shift if you have an HHS award that was awarded after this date. The other thing that they've done is they've put in their notice of award GPS by reference. And so what that really means is it governs the administrative requirements, the cost principles, and the audit requirements. So you have to now strictly tie your cost allowability to subpart E of 2 CFR 200. And you have to use the procurement standards, subrecipient monitoring, performance rating, monitor reporting. They all have to align with these federal rules. So go and review your procurement, your financial and programmatic procedures. And I think the thing you're going to hear is we're going to be giving you action items of like, this is what you should be doing. Prior written approvals and cost principles and monitoring. Update your grant management checklist and your approval workflows. Make sure that they're in compliance with 2 CFR 200. 300, if you go to 2 CFR 300, it basically sends you right back to 2 CFR 200. It's a very short, 1 paragraph long saying, hey, go over here and look at that. So that's what's happening at HHS. You have to be ever mindful when these changes are coming into place, if you have these grants, that they could be giving updates at any minute in time. So let's look at one more that potentially people have. Department of Justice. They updated their general conditions in May and added financial guidance last month. So it's basically cash management. They are basically saying we're going to do this by operational notices. And these notices at any time can come out. They can override or supplement the financial guidance. And so you have to be consistently monitoring their Just Grants system and their websites. What I would recommend is maintaining a conditions log. When you have grants where the terms and conditions are constantly being updated and you're having to go onto websites to find that information. Some agencies will automatically send you those updates, but not all of them are great about it. Maintaining a conditions log so that you can track what changed. You could have the text for the condition, the date it was added, maybe do a screenshot or a PDF link, and then the status and how it impacts you. This will really help you track your compliance, and it's going to simplify audits of performance. And then make sure, we're going to say this a lot today, communicate. Put these changes out to staff. You can't live in a silo. If you learn something new, it's really important that you update everyone who's involved. And it could impact your drawdown timing. It could make you change your documentation. It may change the reconciliation process. But make sure that you have a system in place where you can communicate this out to the stakeholders that are the people on the ground doing the work, make sure that they're fully informed. And then document any of your training.
Oh.
Don't worry, that's good.
Sorry,
Document.
got ahead of you.
So we put this together as kind of like a 5-point compliance checklist. And I think the concept here is, one, you need to consistently pay attention to your word portfolio and the versioning. You're going to have some grants that are living in the past, some that are living in the future, some that, so for example, if you look in your terms and conditions, it may say uniform guidance, parentheses, 2021. And so then you know that you have to use the 2021 version, but it may say use 2024. Then you know you have to use the 2024. Whatever versioning you have figured out for each of your awards, attach that guidance and note the effective date. This can be paper, can be digital, whatever has to happen to track that versioning, because it's going to be an evolving problem, I think. Things are changing relatively rapidly, and you have to stay ahead of it. The second thing is to refresh your SOPs. Go through, update your procurement, all of your approval systems, your subrecipient monitoring, your own internal monitoring systems. Take a fresh look through the lens of the new compliance requirements. Do we have everything we need? So I'll use this example. Internal controls, it used to be that you had to have policies and procedures in place for internal controls. Now you have to document the monitoring of internal controls. So that might require an SOP refresh, or maybe your conflict of interest statement isn't compliant because it doesn't list a partner as an immediate family member, and it doesn't have a section that responds to disciplinary action and how it'll be treated if someone violates conflict of interest. So take a deep dive into all of these requirements that have changed and make sure that your policies are fully vetted. This is something we do a lot with our clients, and we find a lot of gaps. So training and proof, it's great if you know it, but make sure everybody else knows it. Make sure that you put consistent training in place to assist staff members and those boots on the ground workers with doing the right work the right way. And then document it. Archive all of the training documents, the sign-in logs. Make sure that you have evidence. Like Maria said, that's really a sense of due diligence that you're really doing your best. We talked about the conditions log. That's number 4 here. I think it's great to capture things with screenshots to make sure that you've got a great audit trail. Somebody said, I think just yesterday, if I didn't write it down, it didn't happen. That's really the truth. I can tell you what I did, but if it didn't get written down, there's no real way to prove it. So memorialize conditions as they change. And then I recommend quarterly risk scans. Go back through all of your funders. Go to their website, see if anything's updated and changed, any terms and conditions. Read back through your own terms and conditions and make sure, are we really doing that? And I think if you take kind of this collective approach of these 5 different points, you're looking at compliance through a different lens that I think will be really, really helpful. So I recommend, on the next slide, bookmarking things. It's really have things on the ready. We put, for the 3 that we talked about today, FEMA, HHS, and DOJ, we put these in here, but do the same process for yourself. Think of who your funders are, find the website links that are the most important for you, and have them on the ready so that you can get there very quickly and answer any questions you may have. And that brings us to our second polling question. So, how has the current grants management landscape affected your organization? Significantly improved. We received more funding and support than in previous years. Great. Somewhat improved. We've seen modest increases in grant opportunities or success rates. No change. The grants landscape has not noticeably affected our organization. Somewhat challenging. It's become harder to secure grants or meet new requirements. Significantly challenging. We've lost funding and faced major obstacles due to changes in the grants landscape. Not applicable. Our organization does not rely on grants. I'm going to be curious about this one, Maria, to see.
Right.
And we've seen with our clients the full spectrum of this.
Absolutely. What do we got?
Yeah.
Ooh, interesting.
So more than half have no change or somewhat challenging. Interesting. 22% not applicable. So I think, that's an indicator. I have clients that have gained more funding because their work is in alignment with presidential priorities. And we've seen others that have significantly lost funding because their work is out of favor at this time. So,
Right.
all right, let's go on to the next slide. All right, so let's look at emerging trends in the grant landscape. And this is this is where that reading piece is going to kind of take over a little bit. Get my notes up. All right, so if we go to the next slide, one of the big trends is overall funding reduction and realignment. And these statistics really speak for themselves. So I'm going to kind of just say them. So over 145 billion in federal grants funding impacted. That is basically, if you're a nonprofit that relies on federal grants for operations, programs, or staffing, you may face budget shortfalls or program cuts. 28% drop in new grant applications. There's increased competition for remaining funds. Nonprofits, you may need to diversify your funding source or collaborate more strategically. We have nearly half of available funding cut since October 24. Once again, same message. If the funding is cut and we're all trying to get into the same pot, we're going to have a very competitive environment. We have to start thinking of alternative sources, state, local government, foundations, industry sector partners. We have 15,000 plus existing federal grant awards canceled. And so you may think you have a 4-year award that's about to renew a budget period for year 2, and it's cut. So you may be left with unfunded obligations, especially if you've already incurred some cost in preparation for that next year. And many programs have been terminated or consolidated. So you're going to have to stay informed and adapt quickly to new program structures and eligibility rules. So let's look at that a little bit more closely. Next. So we know what the challenge is: adapting quickly, managing program closures, reallocating resources. We know the compliance impact, making sure that you have proper closeout, making sure that you maintain documentation for termination of programs. But I want to kind of, instead of reading exactly those solutions, I want to kind of come at it from a different angle. I want you to think about auditing your current grants. Review every award that you have and give it a risk rating for cancellation or modification, 1 to 5 scale that can help you say, okay, this is 5, a high risk grant. 1, this is a low risk of being canceled or modified. We've already talked about tracking policy changes and monitoring websites. Maintain your documentation. We're going to be super repetitive today because we want you to just kind of take away these key things that you need to be doing. Keep detailed records of your expenditures, any of the communications you had with funders or with subrecipients. Keep that internal communication going. Diversify your funding, because I think at this point we need to be thinking outside of the box, and engage your policymakers. I think you can build relationships with your program officers, but also with legislators and people that have the ability to make an impact. Next. All right. So we also have on top of that shifting priorities. So every presidency has this. This is not new. This is not a President Trump. Every president, if you go back throughout time, they come in with their own agenda. They overturn executive orders from prior presidents. They introduce new ones. We have maybe a volume difference in this case, but we don't have a difference in how government functions. So the shifting priorities. One, we have a domestic focus. We're funding manufacturing, energy independence, infrastructure. We also have closeout of international collaborations and shutdown of DEI programs. And we also have a focus on defense and immigration enforcement. So on the next slide, we can talk about what that looks like. So we have a clear what the challenge is. So the compliance impact is really to look at your program objectives and are they alignment with these new federal priorities? If they're not, then you need to risk assess that one as high risk of having the funding rescinded or not having the funding renewed. And then create clear documentation demonstrating your alignment with the agency and presidential goals in your grant applications and in your reporting. Really make clear connections of this is in alignment. And like I've said, we have some clients that are very aligned and we have other clients that are completely disjointed. And so you may have to go back to the drawing board and rethink your mission and purpose and your vision and see how it can connect to these funding priorities. So, all right, so that's the second major change. Let's go on to the third one. There we go. Grant making and compliance changes. So we are having heightened scrutiny on grant recipients, stricter compliance and audit requirements. We're having indirect cost rate caps with some agencies, and particularly around research grants. And we're seeing a rise in cooperative agreements being issued by federal agencies. This is a higher level of engagement. So if you have just a typical agreement, award from a federal agency, they say you're doing X, Y, and Z, you go off and do X, Y, and Z and spend the money, and then it all flows back in reporting. With a cooperative agreement, it's collaborative in nature. There's tighter federal oversight and engagement in the actual execution of the award. And so I think that's a trend we're going to keep seeing. Next. So we know what the challenge is. I think for me, I have to think about if you're one of those nonprofits that's had a reduction in your indirect cost recovery, it basically kicks into your operating budget. You have to find the money somewhere else. So for example, if you have a negotiated indirect rate of 30% and you're now being capped at 15%, you genuinely have 15% more indirect costs that have to be paid for somewhere. One thing you could think about is there any indirect costs that are being captured that way for ease, but they could actually be directly charged to a grant where you could go back and reorganize the budget and get approval for a little bit more direct costing. Otherwise, that money has to come from somewhere. So there is an impact on your operations, the budget, digging into reserves potentially. So the other thing that I think is really important with the strict grant making and audit requirements is documenting the monitoring of your internal controls. Go back to your internal control documents, strengthen the policies and the procedures, develop a monitoring plan, and then execute the plan. Set up the roles and responsibilities. Who's going to test this? Who's going to sample procurements over the $10,000 threshold to make sure they were done properly? Test the procurements over $250,000 to make sure the standard acquisition threshold requirements were met. who is doing that, when are they doing it, and who has oversight of watching that. And I want to go back and say the same thing in this stricter environment and the stricter audit monitoring. If you didn't write it down, it did not happen. So this is where that regular training, creating your audit readiness trails, getting approved budget adjustments, monitoring your internal controls. And I think that's a good, yeah, that's our third area that's changed. All right, what's next? And I'm not sure how many people on the call this impacts, but it's worth noting because it is significant. Research funding seem to be a big area, and I feel like I think it's threats to long-term research sustainability. We have things that are being developed in the pipeline. We have new drugs, we have new treatments, we have new ways of managing care that are all being researched. And so as that funding is pulled, we have a long-term impact that we need to consider is going to happen. And the other impact that concerns me is young people going into that career and minority researchers. So just something to be mindful on. On the next slide, we can talk about ways you can kind of support that. So seek alternative funding. We know if you're missing that 15% of your indirect costs, or your program has been scaled down or is going to be removed, you have to start looking outside of the box for other ways to subsidize your research. There's a lot of focus on collaboration, going together with other organizations instead of having duplication of effort. We can really share our resources and our expertise and maybe get an exponential return on our work. Provide targeted assistance to early career and minority researchers. If that's something you have the capacity to do, go out of your way in your programming to make sure that that's being supported. And then even if a program is being scaled down, make sure that you're staying up to date with the federal requirements for do your reporting on time, do your closeout properly, make sure that you are staying fully compliant till the bitter end, because the consequence can be cost unallowability at the end. And we're at our third polling question. Hustle, hustle. All right, which of the following emergent trends poses the greatest challenge to your organization's grant strategy over the next 12 months? So it's all the ones we just went through: the funding reduction and realignment, the shifting programmatic priorities, changes in grant making and compliance requirements, workforce and program cuts, all of the above, or we're not currently impacted by any of those things. This helps us see what's trending. Maria, what do you think about all this?
It's a lot to absorb in our, 50 minutes that we're sitting here doing a big data dump. If I'm someone trying to make sure I understand everything that's going on, lots of to-do list making, go back and research.
Yep.
Ooh, look at all of the above.
Yeah. And I'm not surprised by that. I'm not surprised by that. Because workforce and program cuts, even if things are being scaled back, the heightened compliance requirements, the shifting priorities, the funding reductions, I am not surprised by that data at all. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you to go beyond the basics. This is our third section, then we'll do the key takeaways, and then we'll move into questions.
Okay, and looks like we don't have any. I was just quickly checking before we started in on the next section. Section 3, we're getting there. We really are. Beyond the basics. So now that we've covered the foundation of compliance, let's dig into a few specific focus areas, the areas where organizations can easily get tripped up. We'll talk through financial integrity and best practices, internal controls and risk mitigation, leveraging technology, and finally, sustaining compliance and funding over time. Each of these touches a different part of your organization, from your accounting system to your leadership culture, but together they define how effectively you manage federal dollars. So let's start with financial integrity. Accurate tracking and reporting are the backbone of compliance. If your financial data isn't timely or reliable, it's nearly impossible to stay compliant with reporting requirements. I always recommend monthly reconciliations, not just at year-end or end of grant, so discrepancies are caught early. Tools like QuickBooks, MIP, or even customized dashboards can make real-time visibility possible. Then there's cost allocation. Shared costs must be assigned fairly and consistently, whether by time and effort reporting, square footage, or another logical driver. The uniform guidance doesn't dictate the method, it dictates consistency and rationale. Finally, under 2 CFR 200.403 to 0.405, every cost must be necessary, reasonable, and allocable. I know I've said that multiple times, but that's the gold standard when we're looking at grant compliance. Internal controls and risk mitigation. Internal controls are your safety net. They're what stand between honest mistakes and audit findings, or worse, questioned cost. Strong internal controls mean things like segregation of duties, regular reconciliations, and clear documentation standards. Every expense should have a traceable path from authorization to payment. Set up structured approval workflows. Who can approve what, and how often those approvals are reviewed? Automated systems or even simple checklists to help create accountability without slowing down operations are great ideas. And don't wait for risks to become problems. Conduct regular risk assessments, maybe quarterly, to evaluate where you're most vulnerable. That might be cyber risk, staffing gaps, or changes in grant regulations. Proactive risk management is what separates reactive organizations from resilient ones. It's not just compliance, it's sustainability. And let's see, leveraging technology. Technology has completely changed how we manage grants, and it's one of the biggest untapped opportunities for nonprofits. Start by acknowledging that compliance requirements are only getting more complex, but technology can simplify that complexity. Use automation for routine compliance tasks like tracking deadlines, routing approvals, or flagging missing documents. Even small automations save hours and reduce human error. Then there's data analytics and dashboards. Tools like Power BI, Tableau, and Grant Vantage can provide real-time insights into spending, progress, and compliance matrix. Dashboards are a fantastic way to communicate results to funders and leadership alike. Document management systems like SharePoint or OnBase can ensure version control, audit trails, and secure storage. That's a lifesaver when an auditor asks for a document from 3 years ago. And finally, we're starting to see AI and machine learning used to flag unusual spending or predict compliance risk before they happen. These tools aren't replacing people, they're empowering us to be more strategic. And with strategic compliance in mind, it's easy to see that grant compliance isn't just about following rules. It's about keeping your programs alive and sustainable. First, strengthen how you demonstrate impact. Show funders how their dollars made a difference with clear metrics and data visualizations. That builds trust and helps with future funding requests. Second, build strong relationships with funders. Stay in touch even when things aren't perfect. Like all of us, funders appreciate transparency, and proactive communication goes a long way in building a trusting relationship. Third, diversify your funding sources. As Paula mentioned earlier, don't rely on just one grant. Explore foundations, state fundings, corporate partnerships. Think outside the box. And this next one can be a tough pill to swallow for some, but invest in compliance infrastructure, systems, training, and internal controls. They aren't just overhead expenses, they're mission support. Then conduct regular risk assessments so that when regulations change, like they did in 2024 and 2025, your organization can pivot quickly. And finally, plan for sustainability early. Include that plan in your grant proposals. Funders notice when you're thinking long-term. And with that, our next polling question.
Nice. So which area offers the greatest opportunity to strengthen your organization's grant management strategy? Enhancing your financial integrity and best practices, improving internal controls and risk mitigation, leveraging technology for compliance and reporting, sustaining funding and long-term compliance, all of the above, or not sure yet. Maria, I see a question. I want to kind of think about that. That might not be one we can answer. It's a great question. What methods do we see typically to track grants in QuickBooks? QuickBooks, depending on what version you have, you may have to track a grant as a customer.
Right.
All right, all of the above. Keep going.
Awesome. We hit it on the head.
I love the leveraging technology piece, though, for compliance and reporting. I think, Maria, you made some really great points. It is not replacing us. It's supplementing. It's augmenting what we can do, our capacity. It's taking away some of that routine day-to-day stuff that kind of bogs us down so that we have time to do the important work, the big thinking, the policy making, the procedure writing, the things that usually get pushed to the side because we have all these little things we have to tackle all day long.
Absolutely.
All right. So now we're going to talk about our key takeaways. Adapting to a shifting landscape. And I'm really excited. I did a version of this presentation back in August, and I had to go so quickly through it that I felt like I didn't get to kind of come down to this key takeaway. So I actually built this entire section out because it's going to tie everything back together, add a few more pieces. But basically, we're going to look at strategic financial planning and agility, adjusting internal procedures and processes, and then managing your eligibility on that pre-award side and preventing findings on the post-award side. So let's dive right into it. I have lost my notes. Hold on one second. I have misplaced them. I just have a lot of different pieces open right now, so I'm trying to make sure that I have it. Nope. I don't know how that happened. Okay, there they are. Okay, great. Okay. So the first thing I see on this slide is conducting a risk assessment and scenario planning. This is really where you stop right now. I did a presentation actually back in February, right after the O&B pause with Philip from Feldman. We tackled the legal side and we tackled the grants management side. And one of the things I proposed was that you have a waterfall approach. And what I mean by that is you think about the way that things cascade down a river waterfall over the different rocks. Think about your funding streams like that. They're all running in different directions. Look at each individual stream and try to think about what that risk is. We talked about it before, but assigning a point scale to it. Here's this grant. What is the likelihood that I'm going to keep the funding? What's the likelihood that the funding is going to be renewed? What's the likelihood that the funding is going to be reduced? Come up with some metrics. Pull it all together if you're the grants manager or in a position that's overseeing the grant portfolio, and then bring it to leadership and have some earnest conversations about where you see the strengths and weaknesses are within your current portfolio system. So what you can do once you've done that is you can start developing contingency scenarios. We always have a plan A. Okay, well, then we have a plan B. And then we have a plan C. We need to kind of have a map looking forward of what to do if this happens. So this is where you have to think outside of the box of anything that could potentially happen that would impact your funding and make sure you put a scenario in place of how you're going to manage it. It's a preventative step that gets you ready in the event that something happens. And I want to tell you, my daughter just gave birth last Sunday. And she had a birth plan, and it was beautiful, 5 pages long, all typed out, and not one single thing on that plan has worked out. But she had, in developing, the birth plan, she had also developed the contingencies of what would I do if this happens. And so that really is a real world case of this is what happens in life. So professionally, we can do the same thing. Then I think go back to your mission, think of it as a blueprint, and prioritize your mission critical programs. Make sure that you're giving your resources to the things that are most important to your nonprofit, and where there's the least volatility in your potential for losing funding. I'd say don't put your eggs all in one basket, but put your most important eggs in one basket and make sure that you're driving those programs really strongly. Your reputation is based on your deliverables with your grant funding. And so you need to make sure that you're kind of creating alignment internally of these are the most important things we need to focus on. These are the things we can let go of. So risk assessment and scenario planning, I think, is a really, really important. Hopefully, once we had that OMB pause back in January, I think most people started looking through this lens and starting to look further down the road. What's immediately happening to me? What could happen to me in 6 months? What could happen to me in 2 years? So I think that's an important piece. And we've said it again, but these are key takeaways. So I'm going to go back over it again. Explore funding diversification. Once again, not putting all of your eggs in one basket. You need to think about ways that you can build on what you've already established. And when I think about grant writing, one of the things we typically have to do is talk about sustainability. You know, we're going to give you this funding for 4 years. We're going to give you 100% in year 1, 90% in year 2, 80% in year 3, 70% in year 4. How are you going to pay for those reductions? And then what's going to happen in year 5? Having that sustainability plan in place. So hopefully, if you have been writing grants and you're having to create that component, you've already had to think, are we going to use operational funds? Are we going to find a foundation? Are we going to find a corporate sponsor? Are we going to do a capital campaign? Or what are the other ways that we can bring funding into our organization to sustain it in the event that our funding is reduced or canceled? Another thing I've seen one of my clients doing is providing consulting services. They are great at what they do. They are nationally recognized at what they do. Now they are actually monetizing their expertise and providing consultant services to bring in. So think of things that you do that are services that you could monetize. And then I think a big theme going forward is going to be partnerships. It's really how can you collaborate with other nonprofits, with local governments and other businesses. We tend to be pretty competitive. I'm from a Caribbean island where we had 300 nonprofits and 50 of them were all doing environmental work. So as part of a campaign where we said, okay, let's put these 50 nonprofits in piles of what their environmental work is and see if we can get them to collaborate. Instead of each of them going after the same funding, they can collectively go after the funding and have a better chance of success because they're a unified group. And it was actually highly effective. All right, next slide. All right, so strengthen your grants management infrastructure. And I actually break this out a little bit more on other slides, but I'll just hit the highlights there. And that would be for your use down the road. So update your internal controls. Key takeaway. There is the requirement that you document that you are monitoring internal controls. And I'll actually talk about cybersecurity requirements on the next page. I want to get a little specific about it. I know we've mentioned it, but I want to dive into the details. I think the more you can automate, as Maria said, grant management software comes in lots of different shapes and forms. I haven't found one that's 1,000% perfect. And it depends on what your specific needs are. There are high dollar ones that cover a lot. Then there's other versions that cover certain pieces. So you have to think about what your grant management needs are, how you need to assistance in monitoring compliance, getting reporting organized. So I think it's important to look at grant management software. Nonprofits are historically understaffed. I've never met one that said, we have too many people, we're letting them go. It typically is scrambling. State and local government typically scrambling as well, because they don't have the compensation packages that maybe more commercial industries, private industries can offer. So grant management software can take the place of half of a human, if you think about it that way, that it's an investment. It's an investment in your bottom line. So, and then of course, make sure that your staff is trained. I think having a regular scheduled training, monthly, bi-monthly, whatever it is, but that it's on the schedule. Everybody knows it's mandatory. Everyone has to sign in. It can be driven by what's happening now. So you don't have to lay out a year's worth of trainings. Instead, you can have a list of potential training topics. And then as things arise, you're in a position where you can say, hey, we need to deal with this in our training next month because this is showing up as a problem. Maybe it's that people are not turning in their time and effort certification on a timely basis, and we need to retrain everybody on the expectations, maybe need to redesign our system a little bit. So I think strengthening your grants management infrastructure is a really critical piece right now. And then assess your financial resilience and liquidity. Really take a cold, hard look in the mirror. Maria and I were meeting with a client a couple of weeks ago who said we asked about their operating reserves, and they said they had 2 payrolls. And we said, oh, how often is payroll? They said every other week. So, oh, you have 4 weeks of operating reserves. That's a really thin margin. It puts you at high risk. So if you don't have those reserves in place right now, really focus on aiming for building up those reserves. So you have 3 to 6 months of expenses in unrestricted reserves. You really want to get to the place where you're 9 to 12 months, but take it in steps. Make a plan, a financial plan of how we're going to set that money aside. It's unrestricted, and we're ready to go in the event that something cataclysmic happens to us. You may even want to consider going to a bank and establishing a line of credit. If you have gaps in cash flow that you're anticipating, maybe you're having delays to reimbursements, maybe drawdown portals are not open or non-responsive. You're going to need to fill in, because the other choice is you don't pay your bills, you don't pay your people. So maybe a line of credit could be a way that you could bridge that gap. And then it's probably time to go back and look at your indirect cost rates. Let's take a look at those. When is it due to be renegotiated? Has anything in our operations significantly changed that would cause our rate to be very different, that we maybe need to go back and renegotiate with our cognizant agency? What does our cognizant agency require? Has our cognizant agency changed because it's based on your largest federal funder? Have they accepted being your cognizant agency? Have you never done a rate yet, and you've just been living on the 10% de minimis? Now it's 15. Is it in your best interest to keep doing that, or to formally negotiate or an indirect cost rate? People underestimate the value of indirect cost. They were saying, no, I want all the money to go to my program. I really want to make sure that we're feeding these homeless people. I want all of those grant dollars to go to that program. And I get that. In a perfect world, then we can put every single dollar there. But the reality is it does cost money. It costs money to administer a grant. You have accounts payable, you have payroll, you have accounts receivable, you have banking staff, you have janitorial staff. Like, there are costs that need to be rolled up into an indirect cost pool. So I think when you're thinking about your financial resilience and liquidity, if you can think about operating reserves, what's going to be your emergency backup if you have a gap, and how are we approaching our indirect costing right now, I think that would be a worthwhile endeavor. And then the fifth thing I'd like to talk about is engaging in advocacy and preparing legally. There's not lobbying, but advocacy. So it's really, really important. Obviously, nonprofits, you can lobby. It's an unallowable cost. It can't live in your indirect cost pool. But advocacy is an allowable cost. It's something you can do. Join like-minded organizations. So for example, I'm grants management. The first thing I think about is Grants Professional Association, GPA, and National Grants Management Association, NGMA. Think about like-minded organizations. If you're in health, what is the nonprofit group consortium where you guys are discussing your common issues? Then you can advocate together and really try to influence grant policy and funding priorities. The other thing is to stay informed on what's happening legally. There's been a lot of litigation in the last 10 months around grants, about termination of grants, what's allowable and what's not, who benefits from the litigation and who doesn't benefit from it. So there's a lot of information that you need to stay informed about. I have seen some good webinars in the last couple of months as well. So I think it's important that you stay on top of what's happening on the legal side of things, where really all of the challenges are going to, where the drama is going to be. It's all going to be handled in the court system. And then document everything. Just make sure, same thing I said, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Make sure you have all of your documentation in a row. And if you don't, figure out how you're going to. How far back can you go and fix it? And what can you do going forward? That's going to be important, particularly during audit times when questions are asked. All right.
Paula, can we do a clarification on the indirect? We have a question about it.
Sure.
While you were talking about indirect rates, the question is the new 15% cap on indirects across all institutions or just organizations that don't have a negotiated rate? I think we need to clarify it's not a 15% cap. If you don't have an indirect rate, you have the option sometimes of taking a 15% indirect allocation, but it's not necessarily a cap. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and so it's only in specific agencies and specific types of awards where we're seeing it is NIH, NSF, Department of Energy, research grants. So we're seeing it's emerging as a trend that an agency can put a cap on all future awards. So for example, if you have a Department of Energy award that was signed in July 1 of 2025, this year, and you have a rate that you've negotiated with your cognizant agency for 30%, Department of Energy can put in the terms and conditions of the award, you can take no more than 15%. We don't care that you have a 30% rate. We're capping it at 15%. Now, caps are not unusual in grants. If you've been around in grant world and you've had grants, it will say specifically in the NOFO, typically, there's a maximum of 20% modified total direct cost that you can claim. Even if you have a 50% rate, you can only claim 20%. So the concept of a cap isn't unique. It's that we have this pretty low cap at a de minimis, and particularly with research grants, where the indirect rates tend to be pretty high, the 40 to 80%, the cost of doing business. So that's one thing. The second side of the question is, if you do not have a rate, then you can take up to 15% as allowed by the funder. So if the funder only allows 10%, then you can't take 15%, you can only take 10. But if the funder allows whatever you have, then you can take your 15% with not having a negotiated rate. Did I answer that, Maria?
It looks like it. We had two different questions. One said she just answered my question. And then the other one was asking if you could still negotiate indirect rates.
Of
And
course.
you can. It may not be more than 15% if your cognizant agency puts in a cap, and I've seen some that they don't want to deal with indirect rates. They just say it's 15% de minimis and off they go. So going back to one of my points that I was hitting repeatedly was go back to your agreement or go back to the NOFO if you haven't applied yet, so you know what you're getting into. You know what those limitations are. And if you do need to have an updated negotiated indirect rate, know what those timelines are. It's typically 6 months after a fiscal year end is when you have to have it submitted, unless you haven't had one ever. And then it's 90 days after grant award. So there's some pretty tight timelines in there to get a negotiated indirect rate as well. But yeah, we had a couple of those. So I just wanted to hit it again.
Definitely. And I see one of the comments is leveraging technology with grants management needs to include the federal and state governments updating their systems also. They are way behind. And I know with one of my clients, as much as they want to move forward with technology, they're hindered by still needing to have a wet signature as per the requirements of their state. So you're right. You can bring yourself up to speed, but if you can't interface or create, connections between those systems, I think if we had to have the only positive, maybe I'm going to say, output from the pandemic was that many local, state, and federal government agencies were operating in the past with hand. I know the organization that I worked with literally would take a draw packet from human to human by paper to get it signed. And then they would go into a portal and do the drawdown.
Right.
Technology really forced everybody to the pandemic forced everybody to upgrade and really step up and look at how they were doing their work. And it came at a cost, and it's coming at stress. But you're right, federal and state governments are still lagging.
Yep, absolutely.
And then what grant management systems that are effective and cost conscious? It depends on what your annual revenues are, of what's an appropriate system, how robust it needs to be. We have a partnership with Amplifund that I think I have looked at, I think, 7 different programs. And then I've been involved in some implementations with Amplifund. It is the most robust, customizable, beginning to end compliance management, everything. So I'm a huge fan of it, but take that where it is, And let's see. So you are able to negotiate. Yeah, nope, you are. So the question is, so are we able to negotiate a NICRA again? I thought that was no longer allowed, and it was the 15% across the board. Yeah, so the NICRA is still at all the federal agencies, whichever one funds you the most in direct funding, becomes your cognizant agency. And then you can go to their website and kind of look and see, do they have any requirements, any guidance on indirect cost rate proposal development, any templates they expect you to use. So for example, a city in California had to use the California Department of Transportation, and it turned out it was only based on wages or wages plus fringe. It was a 2-page PDF, fill it in, it automatically did all the calculations, and then you turn it in. Super easy breezy. Other ones I see, 400 pages of guidance on all the things that you have to do. So I think, let me see what slide we're on, Maria.
I just changed it. So for your next one, for internal procedures and processes.
The only thing I really wanted to touch on this slide, because I think it's important, it's everything that I just said, but I want to talk about the enhanced cybersecurity measures. We've mentioned it a couple of times, but we didn't get really detailed. So you are charged with implementing reasonable cybersecurity protections for systems handling federal data. And so basically 200.303E is where that's stated. Then 200.206 says that federal agencies must assess cybersecurity risks of applicants. So they're charged with looking at you and your cybersecurity risks. 200.208, they may impose cyber-related conditions on awards. So there may be an additional requirement in your terms and conditions around cybersecurity. And I think that's important for our health industry, for anything related to Department of Defense, things like that, where we have to really be conscientious about cybersecurity risks. That said, that flows down from you. If you are doing a pass-through to a subrecipient, you have the same obligation as the federal government to ensure cybersecurity risks have been assessed and you've imposed necessary conditions. Let's see. Prepare for dual compliance. I do want to spend a half second there. And look at that, we have 8 minutes left, so we're going to see if we have a few more questions. Prepare for dual compliance. So in your grant portfolio, you're going to be living and straddling in different areas of compliance. We have one of our clients has an award that started in 2019, so it's using 2014 uniform guidance. Whereas I have another grant that started in September of last year that's using 2021. And then I have another client who had one start in September of this year, September of last year, but they said, no, don't use 2021. We want you to use the stuff that's coming up on October 1. So just prepare yourself for the requirements that vary. And there's some good webinars out there. Ohio Grant Summit 2024, Stacy Massey did a great overview of all the significant changes to 2 CFR 200. So you need to have like that before picture and the after picture and make sure that you're aligning your compliance appropriately. And next slide. Okay, so we talked about strengthening your framework. We talked about training your staff, documenting and monitoring subawards. I don't know that we spent enough time on that, but it's really, really important that you do a subrecipient risk assessment on the front end and that you document that, because that's going to determine how you're going to monitor them. Low risk is probably a desk review, an annual desk review for monitoring. High risk, you may need to put some specific terms and conditions in the award. You may need to add more frequent reporting, financial reporting. You may do site visits. So it's really, really important that you do a risk assessment on the front end, determine how you're going to monitor, then actually monitor. And there's where I find the weaknesses. Either the risk assessment wasn't done, but I'm finding a lot of clients that I work with haven't done the monitoring. So.
Oops, sorry, not yet, sorry. There we go.
Next slide. Let me see if I jumped forward too much. Yep, no, I'm on the right one. Okay. So think about the front side and the back side of the award. We didn't talk about pre-award too much, but you need to be thinking consistently, am I seeking the right grants? Make sure that you avoid all those trigger words that we've given you a link for once you have the slide deck. Make sure you're verifying that your subrecipients are eligible. Go to sam.gov, screenshot it. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Think about how you're reviewing and prioritizing your pre-award process. Is this a grant that we should be seeking? Is it not? Is it too far off? Are we just chasing money? Or does it truly align? And make sure that you've developed clear roles and responsibilities of who is approving and authorized to officially submit a grant. And have a pre-award compliance checklist. Are we set up for this? Do we have the capacity in place? Post-award, stay on top of the executive orders and policy changes. Track your federal expenditures, like Maria said, reconcile every month. Respond to findings immediately. It's really, really important that you put together a good corrective action plan and that you execute it. Maintain your audit trail. Do random sampling to make sure there's an audit trail for expenses so you know. Strengthen your subrecipient monitoring and be timely with your reporting. Don't miss a deadline. Please try not to miss a deadline. It really paints a picture of your ability to administer the awards. And I think that should be our 5th polling question.
Yes, ma'am.
So which key takeaway are you most likely to prioritize and take action on? These are all the different ones we just talked about. Update your written policies and procedures, enhance your cybersecurity measures, improve procurement practices, prepare for dual compliance, strengthen internal controls framework, one word, apparently, train staff on new compliance requirements, document and monitor subawards. If you were actually walk away today and say, I just have to get this done, what would you pick?
Paula, while they're voting, we have another question. It asks if we could go into more into what is required from a federal award subcontractor disclosures about whistleblowing? Do we, hold on, the poll just got in my way. Do we need to provide in writing to employees how to report information to the specific agency awarding the federal grant?
Yes.
There you go.
Name, phone number, hotline. Typically, it's a hotline number, but you want to have it readily available. And then I'm going to close this and go to our last poll. Would you
Polling
like
question 6.
to you? Yes, maybe in a couple of months, or no, leave me alone. I just have the information. And we're not going to share this with you. This is internally for us. But we really appreciate you all being here today. You asked great questions. We hope that we were able to answer a lot or provide you with a lot of information for moving forward.
Paula, Maria, really nice job.
Thank you.
I learned some things. Okay, so this concludes our second session for today. If you have questions or would like to keep the conversation going, please feel free to reach out at any time. There will be a lunch break now. Our next session, which is navigating the nonprofit tax landscape, essential updates and IRS insights for 2025, starts at 1:30 this afternoon. If you haven't registered for the next session, please find the link in the chat. And before you leave, we appreciate your feedback. One quick survey will pop up automatically when you leave the session. Session recordings, again, as a reminder, and presentations will be available in about a week. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you in the next session.
Maria, will you change the last slide for this last second?
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Yes, I was like, we got to tell them how to get us. They can't find us.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you, everyone, for attending today.